I got a chance to talk to one of my dad's aunties, Aunt Blanche. And Aunt Blanche, on her dying bed, she told me the story of how her family came to Oklahoma. And she had told me they had just amputated her leg. And she told me, she said, well, Harry Jr., she says, I can't dance no more. She said, I used to love to dance. She said, but they didn't cut off my leg, so I can't dance no more. She said, but I still got rhythm. Yeah. And that's the way she was. And I'm going to tell you about her. Let me go back to Daddy's other auntie. And I'll think of her name in a minute. Russell was her last name. Okay. She married Mr. Russell. Anyway, he's the one that had the garage. And Daddy's cousin, the one I call Uncle George, he went to college for auto mechanics and stuff. And he kept, in fact, the garage is still in the family today in Oklahoma, still doing business today. Last time I heard, Gladys's son was using it to do different things to lowrider cars and stuff, putting in the hydraulics and stuff, making it, I don't know, but that's what I had heard. Anyway, back then they did very, very well. Well, all of the sisters was competitive with each other. You see, what happened is, as I was telling you, Aunt Blanche on her dying bed told me, she says, her mother was the daughter of a slave owner. Her mother was a slave. And her mother, which was my auntie's grandmother, or my great-great, or maybe even another great-grandmother, was a slave. And back then, the men would have their way with whichever slave women they wanted to have with. And so she was, my great-grandmother was his daughter. And when they left Mississippi and went to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, or when Oklahoma opened up and they was giving away land and stuff, they went to Oklahoma and he took her with him. Okay, and then she met her husband, who was, they say, David Lee White was his name, and he was out of Texas. Now, they say David Lee White was a character and a half. They say he's the original one that you heard about, where they say you ride your horse into the saloon and say, give me a drink and give me one for my horse. They say that was the original David Lee White. But you know, you'll find out that most of all the old original cowboys were black. Like the Lone Ranger, they tell you today, the Lone Ranger on TV we seen for years and years and years, was not black, but he always wore a mask. And they found out that later on that he was portraying a black man. And a lot of the cowboys back there. And if you stop and you think about it, and then break the word down, cow, boy. It was the boy that took care of the cows. That's the way it started. Anyway, now my uncle's son went to prison 2 or 3 times. That was the brother. I got a chance to meet my uncle's son, character and a half. But Uncle Son went to prison 2 or 3 times, running moonshine and stuff. He said he had a old Hudson that outrun the word of God. You know, that was just the way he was. He would go through them back hills and stuff. Pryor starred in a movie that reminded me of him running moonshine back in the days and stuff. But I tell you, and the one that I was telling you that was in the hospital, she had a house of ill repute. She had 2 big houses of ill repute. Okay, she had one in Oklahoma City, and she had one in Ardmore. Okay, and that's how she could be. All three of those sisters, it was actually four of them, was very competitive with each other. Anyway, to get back to the bombing in Tulsa, one of the sisters married a guy named Dennis, Mr. Dennis. Her name was, we called her Aunt Modell. Her name was Odell Dennis. She married a guy that was involved in the Tulsa Black Wall Street, and he got killed when they bombed the Wall Street, the Black Wall Street back in Tulsa. So that's your hookup there with that. After he died, she got a job working for the railroad. I forget which railroad it was, but she would clean up the railroad cars when they would come in at night. She would, vacuum out the cars and clean them all up and stuff, ready for the next train to go out and people to get on and stuff. So by doing so, she worked for the railroad. So by working for the railroad, she every year she could go anywhere that the railroad went for free. So every year she would come to California and visit us for 2 weeks, and that's how I got to know Aunt Modell. She introduced me to cooking, and I still cook it today. Her peach cobbler, she had peaches and dumplings. I had never heard of peaches and dumplings, and she would cook peaches and dumplings that was almost as good as peaches and pie. Today, when I make my peach cobbler, I put dumplings in the cobbler instead of a bottom crust. I put dumplings in there in the top crust. Love it to death. But she's the one who taught me that. And then her Oklahoma barbecue, she was the first one that I'd ever seen that put a little sugar in the barbecue sauce and made it a little bit sweet. Because Daddy, he would make hot barbecue sauce and stuff. It was totally different. Daddy was a good barbecuer. Don't get me wrong. But Aunt Modell, she had her own twist on things. Anyway, she was in Black Wall Street, and so all three sisters would compete with each other who was doing the best. So Aunt Modell and her man, they did real good in Tulsa. She stayed in Tulsa until she died. She died New Year's Day, 1966, I believe. They said when she died, she still had her hog moths and chitlins in on the stove cooking when she died, which is a traditional meal for New Year's for black people down south. Anyway, I got a chance to, I didn't go to Aunt Modell's funeral, but I did go to Aunt Blanche's funeral, and I did go to Aunt Russell's funeral. Now, she was a good cook too, Now, you gotta understand, she was a fabulous cook. Everybody would, they prided themselves, because they had them church socials and stuff, and everybody would bring dishes and stuff. So all them sisters there would try to outdo each other on what meals they cooked and stuff. So whenever we went to Oklahoma, and they all had adapted my dad. My dad was like a superstar in Auburn, Oklahoma, because he was real good in football. And you see, like I said, he went to Douglas High School, which was a black high school. And back then, they didn't have no professional team and stuff. So the whole town, when they got a chance to get out, they went to the high school football games and stuff. So my dad was a high school football star. Everybody adopted him. He was everybody's kid. So whenever we'd go to Oklahoma on vacation, everybody would take turns inviting us over to their house for dinner. Come on, Smitty, you gotta. They called him Smitty. His name Harry Smith. I'm a junior, the third. He was the second, and actually his daddy was the first. But they called him Harry Jr. And they said, Harry Jr., you got to come by my house and have dinner before you leave. And then we would all, every day, we would go to different places down south out to eat. Anyway, Aunt Reese, Russell was her name. She would have us over, and although she was one of the best cooks, I can't say that she was as good as Miss Spagner, because Miss Spagner cooked wholesome food. See, Miss Spagner didn't cook no no pork and cook with no lard and stuff like that. But for a soul food cooker, homegirl cook, she cooked real good. But Miss Spigner cooked food that was good for you. I mean, she cooked real good food that was real good for you. A lot of meals that my mother would cook that I didn't like, I would like it when Miss Spigner cooked it. She was a great cook. Before I forget again, it was Aunt Lorraine was her name, Lorraine Russell. And she still has a son named Charles Russell that lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma right now. Okay, but her name was Lorraine Russell, and her husband was the one with the garage and stuff. And she could cook, okay? As a soul food cook, she was the best, okay? She didn't take no backseat to nobody, okay? In fact, the last time I was down there, her daughter Gladys taught me how to make some monkey bread. You know, so y'all don't know about monkey bread. So monkey bread that she made wasn't a sweet bread. It was like a dinner roll bread, but it was a pull-apart dinner roll that melted in your mouth. You know, it was unreal. And she did give me the recipe for that, you know. But nowadays, if you look hard enough, you can YouTube it. As long as you don't get the sweet one under there. What they did is, it was so good, they started putting icing on it and stuff and made it a sweet bread and stuff. But the original monkey bread that she made, and I call it Gladys's Oklahoma monkey bread, and you pull it apart, it was like a dinner roll, a really, really good dinner roll. Closest thing that I seen to it was probably Hawaiian rolls, the regular Hawaiian rolls, but hers would have more butter on it and stuff when she would cook it. And they would cook it in like a butt pan, and then it would come out in like a circle, and then you'd pull it apart and stuff. Anyway, that was how that was. And I'm gonna tell you a little story right quick about my Uncle Son before we go. Remember I tell you my Uncle Son was a character? When my father's father got real sick and was gonna die, my father, we lived in Compton, California. And by the way, I lived in Compton when Compton was all white. We was like the second black family to live in Compton, California. So when you see it straight out of Compton, we was the original straight out of Compton, because we was in Compton long before Compton became the Compton that it became. Anyway, in 1958, my grandfather got real deathly sick, and my dad drove home to Oklahoma to see about him. And so back then, it wasn't no expressways or nothing. You had to take old Route 66. And Route 66 was a 2-lane highway that went from California to Chicago. But they would take Route 66 until you got to Oklahoma City. And then they would take a highway from Oklahoma City to go over to Ardmore, Oklahoma. Anyway, my dad was trying to get back to see his dad before his dad died. He wanted to see him just one more time before he died, so he drove night and day trying to get there. Back then, it was a 3-day drive to drive back there. And for him staying awake, trying to get back there, he actually almost went blind by the time he got there.